Howdy, folks. I'm Caleb, and welcome to Influ-Men-Sirs, the podcast where we explore influential men and their influence on men and the broader conversation around masculinity as a whole. Today's episode is a bonus episode unlike others before it, as we will be working on the personality typing system called the Enneagram and how that interacts with masculinity. So the Enneagram is a typing system with 9 types, as Ennea is Greek for 9. For our Influ-Men-Sirs purposes, I thought exploring this conceptually will help listeners unpack sequences of the podcast where the system is mentioned and how it fits into cultural understandings of masculinity. So for today, we will examine Enneagram 1s. All right. So one of the core components that's going to be true for Enneagram 1s is a desire to be good. So what do I mean when I say good? By good, type 1s have a particular drive to be moral. So moral in a way where doing the right thing is kind of one of the most core things to who they are, right? So these are folks that sometimes this type is called the perfectionist, but I prefer another label, which is the reformer. The reason why I like the idea of looking at it as a reformer is it's sort of this sense where if you're constantly striving to do the right thing or do the thing that's good, you're constantly going to see in the world that we live in what isn't good or what needs to be changed or what needs to be reformed. So yeah, that's kind of the core motivation for type 1s. But one of the core fears that tends to be true for type 1s is that idea that they're not morally good, or at very least morally good enough, right? So if in the unconscious or the shadow or the ego or whatever we want to call that part of ourselves that's buried deep down but motivates so much of what we do and how we act, a lot of times for type 1s, what happens is that in that place there is a genuine fear and concern that maybe I am not good. Maybe my striving to do the right thing, I'm not right enough. I haven't improved or reformed myself enough. So all of the Enneagram types have an inner critic. All human beings ever. I'm a therapist and I work with many clients, and we all have things that we kind of hold on to, or that is a form of critique. But for type 1s, it's going to be the starkest. It's going to be the most extreme. And frankly, it's going to be the harshest. Any energy that you're going to find in type 1s, they are really good at noticing what could be made better. So they tend to be excellent editors, right? So whether that is as an official title and role for books or novels or things like that, or, even for something like this, podcasting, content creation, they have a keen eye for how to make things improved and how to make them better. And so along these same lines, they tend to really struggle with black and white cognitions. So what do I mean when I say black and white cognitions? It's just sort of, this is right and that is wrong, right? Or this is the way we need to do things and I'm not budging, right? Some degree of rigidity. But at the same time, that can have a high point or a high side to it, because especially in our modern times and kind of a culture that we're in right now, having type 1 energy, having a desire to want to do things the moral or right way is, frankly, in my opinion, deeply needed. So that's a space where I think 1s are very important. So yeah, a bit about their behavior. Yeah, type 1s tend to be really hardworking, detail-oriented, really thorough, dependable, probably the most conscientious of all types. Again, a lot of what I'll share in these podcasts is going to be true. These qualities that I'll talk about, they'll be true of a lot of types, but you'll notice it may be more true for specific types. So conscientiousness is something I would say that, man, yeah, 1s have that definitely in spades. And then kind of like I mentioned before, I won't go on and on about it, but they can be a bit on the judgmental side, right? But as a reminder, any judgment they may be extending out to others, or if you yourself are 1 and you're listening to this, you know it better than I do. I judge myself more often than I judge other people harshly. So, yeah. And then one other thing I'd like to note is just, so they are in something that's called the anger triad. So types 8, 9, and 1 are what's called this anger triad. And all three of the types kind of have a different way in which anger is expressed. So for type ones, again, if we're holding this idea of them really caring about what's moral or what's good, um, the way that their anger tends to be felt is through a form of resentment or passive aggression, right? So where it couldn't be sometimes, direct critique or direct, angst or frustration about what they're noting about your behavior or what they note about themselves. In a lot of ways, it kind of has this, um, it's almost like a dam of water that it keeps building and building and building as they notice all these things in the world that could be improved, including about you, but also about themselves, also about their car, also about culture, also about the workplace, so many different things, right? And it just builds, 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 and then it can be felt as, a form of resentment. So, famous characters that likely are type ones. So I would definitely say Jon Snow of Game of Thrones definitely fits this bill. So, kind of a joke aside, I'm going to describe a lot of things about Jon Snow pre my queen era, where a lot of what may be true about his type 1 energy kind of went out the window as, particularly in the show, the quality really deeply declined. But yeah, so you really see a lot of this archetypal 1 energy in Jon where he kind of carries this shame and stigma, obviously, in the books and the shows early on of, being a bastard and everything that comes with it, that shame. And so, if anything, what I would argue is that he kind of fits the bill for this personality because everyone assumes wrongly of him, right? There's this shadow cast upon him that's of no fault of his own. So, in some ways, his desire for that being like morally, perfect and kind of just always doing right, the very best that he can, right? Obviously with the wildlings and letting them into the wall, and then the spoilers, I should say spoilers. um Obviously the men of the watch did not much care for that, but us as an audience were like, yep, that's the moral thing, right? That is arguably the right and moral action. So yes, I would say Jon Snow fits this bill really, really well. Another character that comes to mind is Captain America. So both of these fellas here, they fit this bill really, really well. So one thing that I think is really true about Captain America is that his rigidity is more about him doing what's right by people that are close to him. So like in the Civil War era of both the MCU, but in the comics, truth be told, I don't know the comics super duper well, mostly referring to the movies. Don't get mad at me. But in the movies, right, him kind of opting for, I don't think the government is in the right about trying to rein in us as superheroes. I don't think that the basically pursuing his friend Bucky and everything that went on with there, where obviously it was not really his faults, mind control, all that jazz. You guys have seen these movies. Him kind of standing in contrast, in conflict with Iron Man, right? With, the government that's kind of wanting to clamp down on that. That comes from his deep sense of wanting to do what is morally right by the group, right? And I think that both for Captain America and Jon Snow, what people find inspirational, but also at times annoying, even within the story, is just them really, really caring about what is right by their own standards, by the group standards. But it's also where in both universes the characters are deeply respected and admired and followed because they really focus on what is the right thing to do. So, yeah, a little bit here about common mistypes that happen with type 1. So, they can be mistaken for type 3s because both are really hardworking, both put in long hours at things. Um, they can be pursuing a lot of projects, both tend to be on the move, both really, really high work ethics for totally different reasons. But the key difference is sort of while they both have a desire to come across a certain way to other people. I would argue that for type threes, it's a little bit stronger. And also the reason for how they want to come across is different. So for type ones, they want others around them to see them again as morally good, as morally right. Whereas type threes, they tend to want to come across as the best or the most proficient or the most admirable, things more like that. Another mistype that can tend to happen for type ones is type fives. Again, this is usually true, but not always true, but both tend to be a little bit more on the introverted side. Both tend to be comprehensive thinkers. Both types definitely deep think really, really well. And yeah, very knowledgeable about certain topics or things that they have interest in. The way in which I would say that ones and fives differ is, again, kind of, you'll see the same motif that ones really care about what's morally right. And it's not even saying that like other types don't care about it. Of course, other types care about it. But for fives, a lot more of what their focus of attention goes on is knowledge, right? The pursuit of knowledge, the mastery of knowledge. Whereas ones may be really knowledgeable on something, they might even be masters of a certain topic. But the reason that they are the master of it often stems from this desire to, as I said, be morally good. So yeah, the tell of type ones, or what I mean by the tell is how you can kind of go about your world and be like, oh, who I'm interacting with, they're probably type one, is, as I mentioned before, this internal critic. So all human beings ever, like I shared before, I'm a therapist. We all have inner critics, myself included. But for type ones, it's the harshest. It's the most intense. It never lets up. Drawing on kind of therapy that I'll do at times with clients called internal family systems, IFS. There is a what's called a manager part, and a manager part is essentially this part of you that is a bit tyrannical, a bit harsh, a bit questioning of you. Why did you do this? You could have done that better, and sort of like hawkish around your mistakes. So again, ones have that really, really in leaps and bounds more than other types. And then the next part here from vice to virtue. So kind of like I was mentioning before, there can be those struggles with resentment where if in the world you're really concerned about being morally good in all places, right? With yourself, with your spouse, with your kids, with your parents, with your job, all of the things, right? Over time, that can build in resentment as you notice that other people are in some ways not as concerned with that as you are. What can sort of serve again as that vice, or at least that thing that you struggle with, the way in which a virtue is kind of like pursued instead as a way of, kind of becoming awake and not falling asleep to this shadow side or this egoic part of ones that tend towards this resentment. Then you begin to lean into what's called serenity. So serenity is essentially this idea that with time, with work, with therapy, with conversations with other people, and all things in between, you start to accept that which is imperfect, that could be reformed, that could be better, but also is good as it is. So yeah, that's the vice to virtue of it all. And then kind of how their conversational pattern tends to look. So again, everything that I'm sharing here, it's not super duper hard and fast. It's more general principles. And what I like to share with people when I'm coaching Enneagram is that this is stuff that is only meant to build compassion for yourself and for other people. Frankly, if you listen to this and then you start judging others, including type ones, don't do that. Please don't do that. If anything, the main goal here is compassion. But yeah, that being said, what I would say about Enneagram ones is that the way that they tend to have conversation is a bit of a sermonizing or preaching tendency. So what I mean by that is when they're talking about a situation or, for example, if you were to maybe ask them for advice or input on something, they would kind of look at the high road, the moral route, the kind of principled stand, so to speak, right? That's neither good nor bad, right? It's neutral. And some, as I mentioned before, in our modern day and age, I think it's better. I think we need a little bit more of this. And yeah, kind of the last bit here is places or institutions or countries or whatever it may be, just physical context that you can find yourself in that may carry one-ish energy. So I would say that one thing that comes to mind is sort of the average American's image of a stereotypical church, right? I'm thinking of like instances of episodes of maybe The Simpsons, right? My wife and I have been watching that recently. It could be whether it's other TV shows or films or just something where when you go into a church, there's this sort of emphasis on being buttoned up and being good and don't swear, and things like that, right? I'm a bit stereotyping, but I'm just kind of demonstrating it as a space that has a bit of one energy. And then another one would be an ethics committee. If anything, I think this is on the high end or the healthy side of ones. Folks that they're debating or discussing what is the most ethical route to take with a given course of action or whatever it may be. Super duper one energy. And again, I would argue in the best sense. And then one that's a little bit more surprising is a winery. So I think that when one sort of feel like they can quote unquote put their hair down or kind of relax, be a little less concerned with the idea of being morally good, they can in their own way kind of be a bit snobby. But what I would say about a winery fits the bill is it's just kind of a place that it has that sense of serenity, right? It has that calm. They tend to be beautiful locales. They tend to be places of rest and kind of high class, high civility, you might say. So that's kind of why I argue that that feels one-ish, that space. But yeah, fam, that's kind of the episode for today. Hope you like it. Hope you enjoy it. And I mentioned Jon Snow. I mentioned Captain America. Look for them and other hypothetical type ones that we will review for the pod. And if you like this and you want to subscribe and do all that good stuff, post below who you think may be a one or that you would love for the Influ-Men-Sirs to review. But yeah, that's all that I got. And hope y'all are having a wonderful day. All right. Peace.